Most of the bedtime stories we hear as kids start with the exact same comforting phrase, right? Once upon a time. It's a formula. When we hear it, we are instantly prepped to safely accept magic, fantastic creatures, and the mysterious because we know it's just a story. But what happens when the inexplicable absolutely refuses to wait for a storybook? What happens when it physically knocks on your front door? When your reality is suddenly violently overtaken by fantasy, the things you experience can literally haunt you for a lifetime. Now, there are thousands of stories out there about close encounters of the third kind. You know the ones: distant sightings, fleeting, strange lights in the sky. But very few of them involve a true, sustained, claustrophobic night of pure, inescapable terror. Today, we're stepping into the dark. In this explainer, we are dissecting one of the most terrifying documented events in American folklore, the 1955 Kelly-Hopkinsville encounter.
I want you to genuinely put yourself in the scenario for a second. Think about it. What would you actually do? Imagine you're in an isolated farmhouse. You are miles away from the bustling city, surrounded by nothing but acres of dense, quiet woods. It is pitch black outside. Even the crickets have completely gone silent. And then, suddenly you find a grotesque creature standing right at your door. Do you try to communicate with it? Do you invite it in? And what if this fantastic, unearthly creature begins to approach you in a deeply threatening manner, raising these elongated, unnatural arms violently towards you? How would you react? Now multiply that single creature. A whole horde of monsters begins to assault your home. They are actively trying to find a way inside, scratching at the walls, reaching through the cracks to grab you. You have absolutely no idea what their intentions are. And honestly, you simply can't risk finding out.
There is no moment of greater danger than when you are safely locked inside your own home and something tries to get in. That thought perfectly captures the sheer, unadulterated psychological terror experienced by the Sutton family and their friend Billy Ray Taylor on the humid night of August 21, 1955. Whatever your rational reaction might be in that hypothetical scenario, there is one universal feeling that dominates absolutely everything else when it happens for real: profound, primal fear. To truly understand the frantic, desperate actions of the people trapped inside that Kentucky farmhouse, we have to recognize that every single choice they made was driven by the absolute terror of being caged. They were locked inside a space that is fundamentally supposed to be a safe haven, a sanctuary, while something unearthly, metallic, and completely relentless continually tried to force its way in.
Now, this nightmare didn't just happen all at once. It wasn't a jump scare. It built, step by agonizing step, stretching the nerves of everyone involved until they completely snapped. The siege of 55 began right around dusk. Billy Ray Taylor walked out to the well to fetch some water, and in that fading evening light, he sees something completely unnatural. He spots a strange, glowing light reflecting off the leaves of the trees, silently announcing the arrival of, well, something. Then, an excruciating waiting period begins. As nightfall fully sets in and erases the horizon, a figure emerges from the blackness of the woods. The men, Lucky Sutton and Billy Ray, watch in absolute disbelief as this entity steadily approaches the house. By midnight, the tension completely explodes. It goes from a bizarre, silent sighting into a frantic, terrifying gunfight to protect the women and children cowering inside the house. And finally, around 3 a.m., the siege reaches such an unbearable, suffocating peak that the families make a desperate break for safety, fleeing blindly into the night.
Picture exactly what walked out of those Kentucky woods. When the witnesses later gave their breathless, completely trembling reports to the police, they described a being that looked like absolutely nothing from this earth. We are not talking about your classic, smooth-skinned, pop culture little green man here. Because it possessed such strange, fantastical, and deeply unsettling features, people quickly began referring to it not just as an alien, but as a goblin. Seeing this grotesque figure step out of the shadows, throwing its massive hands up toward the sky as it steadily advanced on the house, you can see exactly why the primal instinct for self-defense immediately and violently kicked in for Lucky and Billy Ray.
Let's actually break down the specific anatomy of these invaders, because the details are chilling, and they plunge us right into the uncanny valley. Witnesses reported seeing anywhere between 12 and 15 of these creatures lurking in the shadows around the property. They were small, only about 3.5 feet or roughly 90 centimeters tall. Their heads were perfectly round and disproportionately massive compared to their incredibly thin, almost atrophied-looking legs. They had enormous, pointed ears, framing these massive, oval-shaped eyes that glowed with a piercing, unblinking yellow light. Their arms were incredibly long, nearly dragging on the earth, and ended in large hands equipped with sharp claws. And perhaps the most unnerving detail of the whole night? Their skin gave off a luminescent silver-gray glow. It was almost as if they were made of some unknown metallic alloy.
Oh, and they didn't walk like we do. They seemed to float or hover, gliding silently just inches above the ground.
So, the goblin floats ominously toward the house, its clawed hands raised. The family inside is completely panicking. The unknown is quite literally at their door. Lucky and Billy Ray, driven by sheer blinding adrenaline, grab a rifle and a 20-gauge shotgun. They take aim and they fire the first deafening shots out into the dark. But against all odds, the bullets don't pierce flesh. According to the men, the impact sounded exactly like shooting a tin can, a distinct metallic clink echoing in the still night air. The creature didn't fall down dead, it didn't bleed, instead it performed a bizarre, physics-defying backflip and completely vanished back into the darkness of the woods. This right here is the horrifying moment the Sutton family realizes their weapons, their one and only means of defense, might be entirely, fundamentally useless.
And guys, this wasn't just a single spooky encounter, it was a relentless, calculated siege. Inside that dark, silent house, minutes stretch into hours. The tension is absolutely suffocating. Suddenly, a scream rings out from the living room. The women point wildly at the window. One of the creatures is peering inside, its glowing yellow eyes slowly scanning the room, hunting for movement. The men instantly fire, shattering the glass, and again the creature does a rapid backflip and just disappears. Trying to ensure the coast is clear, Billy Ray cautiously steps out the front door. He looks around into the pitch blackness. Nothing. But suddenly the women and Lucky scream for him to move. Reaching down from the roof, directly above the doorway, is a silver-clawed hand. It's silently swiping down, trying to grab Billy Ray by the hair. Lucky shoves his friend back inside, narrowly saving his life, and fires a desperate blast directly upward, right through the roof of the house.
The terror inside that house was absolute. Every single time they thought it was over, every time they allowed themselves to take a breath, another creature would drop from a tree or peek its glowing eyes around a corner. Eventually, at 3 o'clock in the morning, the families hit their absolute breaking point. They couldn't wait for the sun to come up. They abandoned the frail safety of the walls, running out into the pitch-black night, completely exposed to whatever was waiting out there in the trees. They piled into 2 vehicles and sped blindly down the rural roads straight to the Hopkinsville police station. They were so visibly shaken, so utterly traumatized and terrified that the police immediately knew this was no drunken joke. The families returned to the farmhouse accompanied by Sheriff Russell Greenwell and 20 heavily armed officers. When the police arrived, the atmosphere was still incredibly thick with dread. The officers themselves witnessed strange lights and heard bizarre noises in the dark, confirming that something highly unusual, something fundamentally wrong had disturbed the quiet Kentucky countryside that night.
Let's shift gears for a second. We've heard the terrifying narrative, but now it's time to dissect the legend. Fact, fiction, or fear?
For decades, serious investigators have tried to categorize this terrifying event. Classifying the unknown requires looking at tendencies and physical effects. According to reference manuals on cryptid and extraterrestrial classification, the Hopkinsville entities are utterly fascinating. Their physiology straddles the very thin line between terrestrial animal behavior and straight-up science fiction. So we are forced to ask, is this a case for cryptozoology, the search for unknown, hidden earthly animals, or is it xenology, the study of true extraterrestrial alien life? The glowing eyes, the sharp claws, those eerie gliding movements, they all create a massive puzzle that experts are literally still trying to solve today. Whenever an incident of this magnitude occurs, 2 distinct factions inevitably form, right? On one side, you have the believers. They look at the metallic skin, the physics-defying floating movements, the apparent immunity to point-blank bullets, and the sheer number of entities as undeniable, hard proof of an extraterrestrial visit. On the other side, you have the skeptics. They try to find a rational, earthly explanation for what terrified these families so deeply. The skeptics argue that collective panic is an incredibly powerful, dangerous phenomenon. In a small, isolated group, fear can act like a contagion, making us exaggerate reality, twisting ordinary shadows into monsters, and transforming a contained, explainable event into an absolute, bloody nightmare.
The most prominent skeptical theory out there is both fascinating and honestly pretty grounded: the great horned owl. Some investigators firmly believe that what the Sutton family encountered wasn't a spaceship full of metallic goblins, but actually a flock of highly aggressive great horned owls fiercely defending their nests in the dark. Think about the physical descriptions from the perspective of someone who is terrified. Standing about 3 feet tall, large yellow eyes that vividly reflect ambient moonlight, floating, which is actually just the silent deadly gliding of a predatory bird, and long arms, which were actually wings spread wide in a defensive, threatening posture. In the pitch black of night, Fueled by blinding adrenaline and total panic, it is highly possible that a family completely misidentified aggressive territorial birds as alien invaders.
But there is an even wilder and, frankly, more tragic skeptical theory. Some have suggested that Billy Ray and Lucky actually brought monkeys from a traveling fairground where they supposedly worked, intending to play a massive, terrifying prank on their own isolated family. The silver coloring? That could have been reflective paint. The erratic flipping movements, very typical of an agile primate trying to escape gunfire. Whether it was a fiercely defensive owl or a painted, escaped monkey, the skeptics argue a truly heartbreaking point. The true monster that night wasn't an alien at all. It was fear. A fear so blinding that it escalated a massive misunderstanding into a full-blown rural war, where a family nearly killed each other firing shotguns wildly into the dark over a hallucination fueled by sheer adrenaline.
So what happened after the smoke cleared? Let's dive into the extraterrestrial legacy of the Hopkinsville encounter. It is genuinely fascinating how humanity processes trauma and terror. Sometimes the absolute best way to exercise our deep-seated fear of the unknown is to just turn it into a carnival. Over the decades, the sheer terror of that August night transformed into booming community commerce. The town of Kelly, Kentucky totally embraced its terrifying alien history, hosting annual, lighthearted festivals to celebrate the little green men. Even 62 years later, during a major solar eclipse that just happened to coincide with the exact anniversary of the attack, thousands of people flocked to the area. They were buying merchandise, eating food, half expecting the goblins to return in the sudden daytime darkness. We take what terrifies us, the things that keep us awake at night, and we make it fun. It's a psychological coping mechanism that makes the vast unknown feel just a little bit less dangerous. But perhaps the most incredible legacy of the Hopkinsville Goblins isn't found in a Kentucky tourist festival, but rather in Hollywood. How on earth does a story about an isolated family engaging in a terrifying, violent, hours-long shootout with glowing, metallic monsters turn into one of the most beloved, heartwarming family films in cinematic history? It is an incredible piece of cinematic trivia that brings this terrifying story full circle. And it all comes down to the exact right creative genius hearing the exact right terrifying legend. Famed astrophysicist and ufologist J. Allen Hynek deeply investigated the Hopkinsville case, treating this rural shootout as a serious scientific inquiry. Years later, while working as a dedicated consultant on the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Hynek shared the terrifying Kentucky legend with none other than director Steven Spielberg. The story completely stuck with him. When Columbia Pictures later asked Spielberg for a dark, scary sci-fi sequel, he immediately remembered the horrific story of the glowing, long-armed aliens terrorizing a farmhouse. But Spielberg, being the master storyteller he is, masterfully flipped the script. He took the horrific, floating, bulletproof goblins of 1955 and totally inverted their nature. He transformed them into a gentle, innocent, misunderstood botanist stranded on Earth. Yes, you heard that right. The terrifying, nightmare-inducing Hopkinsville home invasion is the direct, foundational inspiration for the lovable blockbuster E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Crazy, right?
The Suttons fought that night in 1955 to protect their family, and they spent the rest of their entire lives fighting against the ridicule of skeptics, insisting until their dying days on the absolute truth of what they saw. We may never have a definitive answer. Was it a highly defensive great horned owl swooping from the trees? An elaborate, tragically dangerous prank with painted monkeys? A genuine, terrifying visitation by luminescent beings from another world? Or simply an extreme demonstration of how the overwhelming power of collective fear can violently distort our reality? We will never truly know for sure. But remember this, whatever it was, the terror the Sutton family felt that night, trapped in the dark, was 100% real. So I'll leave you with this. What do you think really happened in the blackness of those Kentucky woods?